Good morning, everyone, and good to see you all again. Of course, I saw most of you last week, but you haven't seen Bhante Suddhaso in about 2 months. And Geeta is very excited. Says, hope you had a wonderful and fruitful retreat. And good morning as well to Jens. Good to see you. Yeah. Very diligent practitioner.
He's left us, but he's still with us.
And good to see Kau's our friend as well, Sarah Key from Australia.
Saw him last night.
Yes. And Elaine, who says, welcome back. Hope you had an enlightening retreat. And good morning as well to Robin, Kyle, Michael, and others who are watching from behind the scenes. So this morning, we're back with our usual sutta study. And this morning, we'll be taking a look at a sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. So I'll pass things over to Bhante Suddhaso for this morning's talk.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good morning, friends. So this morning, we'll be looking at Anguttara Nikaya 5.78, which is translated here as future dangers. So this is one of 3 suttas where the Buddha talks about 5 future dangers, 5 possible scenarios which can come up in the future which make it difficult to practice. So as usual, I'll read through the sutta and give some explanations as we go along. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions if you have any questions. So feel free to enter your questions at any time and I'll go through them at the end. So the sutta begins. The Buddha says, monks, seeing 5 future dangers, a monk has sufficient reason to vigilantly, diligently, and resolutely live for the sake of reaching the unreached, attaining the unattained, and realizing the unrealized. What 5? So this is, he's introducing the basic concept here. He's saying that these are things which we should contemplate in order to encourage us to be very sincere and diligent in our practice. One of the problems that often arises in Buddhist practice is laziness or lack of motivation. So often in the very beginning of Buddhist practice, we're motivated, we're enthusiastic, we've discovered this amazing new thing. Well, new to us, it's not a new thing in the world. We discover this amazing new thing of Buddhist practice and we're very gung-ho about it. But then at some point it becomes clear to us that this is not a short-term project. It's a very long-term project. And it's usually not very exciting. In fact, it's very frequently quite boring, to be honest. So we start to lose our resolution. We start to lose our motivation and we start wasting a lot of time posting silly things on Facebook, watching Chinese videos or whatever it is we do in order to waste time and drift farther away from enlightenment. So it's easy to lose our motivation. And so the Buddha gives these 5 contemplations as ways of helping us to recognize the wonderful opportunity that we currently have so that we continue to put forward effort in our practice. And he says, for reaching the unreached, attaining the unattained, and realizing the unrealized. So this doesn't just mean full enlightenment, it actually means any development which leads us in that direction. So what have we not yet reached? Have we not yet reached first jhana? Well, we should make an effort to reach the unreached. Have we not yet attained stream entry? Well, we should make an effort to attain the unattained. Have we not yet realized the selflessness of phenomena? We should make an effort to realize the unrealized. So he's pointing to the fact that these are things which can be achieved if we put forward the sufficient effort. So the first one he gives, he says, monks, here a monk considers. Currently, I am young, youthful, dark-haired, with the blessings of youth early in life. This assumes you actually are those things, young and youthful and so on. If you're not, well, that's a problem because you're running out of time. Death is close. But this is assuming that you're currently young. I think I'm young, but apparently that's changing rapidly. There's a few other people in the room who also look relatively young, but still changing rapidly. And that's what the Buddha says. The Buddha, he then says, but there will be a time when this body is affected by decrepitude. So decrepitude is as the body starts to get older, it starts to fall apart. The mind and body don't work so well anymore. We start to have physical health problems. We start to have mental health problems. We start losing our memory. I don't have much memory to lose in the first place, so that's kind of a scary one. It's harder to focus the mind. It becomes much more difficult to do long periods of sitting meditation when your health is not good. So this is something that we really need to think carefully about. Right now, presumably, right now we're relatively young, relatively healthy, but it's not always going to be that way. In fact, with every passing year, we're getting older. And with every passing year, our faculties are getting weaker. So we want to make the most out of our current condition, this current condition of youthfulness. So the Buddha continues. So again, he says, there will be a time when this body is affected by decrepitude. When it is decrepit and dominated by decrepitude, it is not easy to pay attention to the instructions of the Buddhas, and it is not easy to make use of remote wilderness dwellings. Point I'd like to point out, by the way, is that he does in the text use the plural Buddhas, not singular Buddha. So there's many places in the suttas where the Buddha, he talks about Buddhas in the plural. So he's not just talking about himself, he's talking about the universal Dhamma, which is the same instructions given by all Buddhas throughout past, present, and future. So he says that as one gets older and one's physical and mental health start to decline, it's harder to pay attention to the Buddha's teachings. It's harder to focus one's mind on the Dhamma. It's harder to understand the Dhamma. One's faculties tend to decline. And also, since one's health is not so good, then it's difficult to, he says here, to make use of remote wilderness dwellings. So that means it's difficult to live an austere life. As one gets older, one's health is not so great. One needs more medical attention. One needs more secure, comfortable dwelling places, or one has to make a stronger effort to keep the body from falling apart completely. Whereas when you're young and healthy, then you can do crazy things like meditate all night long until dawn. You can do crazy things like sleep under a tree instead of inside a building. But when you get older, it's much harder to do these kinds of austere practices. So the Buddha continues. He says, that unappealing, undesirable, unpleasant condition has not yet come to me. So one reflects, oh, I'm not yet old and decrepit. That's great. I have not yet reached that horrible condition, which inevitably everyone eventually comes to. Again, if you already are old and decrepit, well then, bad news, it's only getting worse. So y'all better get on your practice. So the Buddha continues. He says, before that happens, I will put forth energy to reach the unreached, attain the unattained, and realize the unrealized, so that when I am decrepit, I will live comfortably. So this is the other reflection. So you can actually see this in people who are old. their health is failing, and they haven't been sincerely practicing Buddhism. They have a really hard time. They tend to be grumpy and grouchy, and uh, they tend to face the decline of their faculties with a lot of fear or depression or anxiety. Uh, One of our residents was talking about her aged father, who, even though he's in his 80s, he still uh, suffers terribly just with the prospect of being alone. It's like, well, if you get to 80 and you don't know how to be alone, wow, that's pathetic. I'm perfectly honest. You should learn how to be alone when you're 10 years old, not when you're 80. So, but this is actually the case for the majority of people. They go through their whole life never developing the ability to face life. They go through their whole life avoiding things, avoiding their life, avoiding their experiences, avoiding their emotions, avoiding their fears. But as we get older and older, we start to lose those internal defense mechanisms that we've built up. And we start to come face to face with all the things that we've been running away from. But since we haven't developed the spiritual strength, the equanimity, the wisdom to handle those things with grace and dignity, then it's overwhelming. And as you get older, your body becomes more and more overcome with pain. Different parts of the body can start breaking down. Digestive system doesn't work as well. Your muscles hurt all the time. Your bones ache. It's hard even just to get up out of bed and walk around. And if you haven't developed mindfulness of the body, if you haven't developed an understanding of feeling, if you haven't developed equanimity, awareness of impermanence and not self, then that's all really distressing. On the other hand, if you have developed your spiritual practice well, then you can face the decline and failing of the body with a serene mind, a peaceful mind, even a joyful mind. So the Buddha, then he says, monks, seeing this, the first of the future dangers, a monk has sufficient reason to vigilantly, diligently, and resolutely live for the sake of reaching the unreached, attaining the unattained, and realizing the unrealized. So since I still identify as young, I find this contemplation quite useful. I'm like, currently I am young, youthful. Well, I don't actually have any hair to be dark. And I don't know if it's even dark anymore because I haven't seen my own hair in a really long time. But I think I have dark hair. Blessings of youth, it's true. Early in life, it's true. But this is also rapidly changing. It won't be terribly long until I'm 40. I see some laughs and some head shakings in the room. There's some people here who are already past that mark. You're old. You're dying. 1 foot in the grave. Stop wasting time. Okay. So then, then the next one. The Buddha says, next, monks, a monk considers. Currently, I have few afflictions and few ailments, and my stomach digests well. It is neither too cold nor too hot. It is just right and tolerant of exertion. This one actually doesn't apply to me too well. My digestion is actually not so great, and I do have some physical problems. The Buddha continues, but there will be a time when this body is affected by sickness. When it is sick and dominated by sickness, it is not easy to pay attention to the instructions of the Buddhas, and it is not easy to make use of remote wilderness dwellings. So, the Buddha is pointing here to the fact that it's much easier to practice sincerely when you're healthy. When your health is in good condition, then you're not distracted by a lot of pain and discomfort. You can eat whatever random things people put on the table, then it's not a problem. You can meditate for long, long hours without dealing with a lot of pain or struggles with the body. So this is the ideal condition, is when the body is healthy, free of afflictions, free of problems, easy to take care of, easy to look after. So if that's the condition that we have, we should recognize what a rare and precious thing that is. We should recognize what a wonderful opportunity is to practice when we're healthy. And if our health is not so good, then once again, we should contemplate, well, it can get worse. In fact, it probably is going to get worse. That's the nature of bodies. The nature of bodies is that they're prone to sickness. They're prone to failing. So whenever we have some degree of health, we should recognize that this is a valuable opportunity to practice diligently. So not wasting time. So he continues, that unappealing, undesirable, unpleasant condition has not yet come to me. May it be so. Before that happens, I will put forth energy to reach the unreached, attain the unattained, and realize the unrealized, so that when I am sick, I will live comfortably. So again, here he's pointing to the fact that if we develop a strong practice when we're healthy, when it's easy, then when we're sick, that strength of practice will carry through. So that we won't be distraught or overwhelmed when our health is failing, because we'll already have cultivated the strength of mind to face it well, to handle whatever unpleasant sensations are coming up, to handle difficulties with food, to handle physical pain or weakness in the body. If our practice is already strong, then these things are not such a problem. We can face them and deal with them without being distracted or disturbed by them. Then the third case, he says, next monks, a monk considers. Currently, it is easy to be a mendicant. The crops are good. It is easy to get alms food. It is easy to survive by collecting donations. But there will be a time when it is hard to be a mendicant, when the crops are poor. It is hard to get alms food, and it is not easy to survive by collecting donations. So this is particularly relevant to monastics, of course, since we rely upon donations. We rely upon alms food, so food that's given to us. We rely on the gifts of others for everything that we use, everything that we have. So when we're in circumstances where it's easy to get by, so people are giving plenty of donations, it's easy to go out for alms. So actually, alms around in Buddhist countries, for example, it's quite easy. You just take your bowl and you go walking in the morning, and usually within a few minutes, you have more food than you could possibly eat for the day. So it's very easy. It's much harder in non-Buddhist countries like this one. It's much more difficult, but still doable. Still doable. And many monasteries do have a regular alms round that they do, but it's significantly more difficult. And the Buddha here, he also mentions times when crops are poor. So when there's widespread famine would be one interpretation of this, but also another interpretation would be when the food that's being produced is low quality. So that's a big problem in this country, for example. So even though this is a technologically advanced country, we have the problem that a lot of almost all of the food produced in this country is very low quality. So full of toxic chemicals, stored for long periods of time, shipped long distances. So you wind up with something that, even though it's plentiful, it's actually not particularly good to eat. It's not good for your body. So that would also, in my mind, fit under the case of when the crops are poor. So it's also referring to the quality of the food, not just the quantity. So it's recognizing that there are these two circumstances. So one is when it's easy to get by as an alms mendicant, and the other is when it's not so easy to get by as an alms mendicant. And life is a lot easier. So when all you have to do in order to survive is just get up in the morning and take your bowl and go out walking for a few minutes, and you're surrounded by Buddhist lay people who shower you with everything you need, well, life is really easy. You've got 23 and a half hours of every day just to focus on doing your practice. You don't need to worry about mortgage payments or refrigerators or any of the other crazy things that Western monasteries have to deal with. Um, so when things are good, you recollect, these are amazing conditions and I should make the most of them. And when things are not so good, you can reflect, well, it could be even worse. Could be a lot worse. So once again, we should make the most of the supportive conditions that we have. And the Buddha also gives an interesting um, add on to this. He says, when it is not easy to be a mendicant, people gather in places where it is easy to be a mendicant. There they live crowded together. When living crowded together, it is not easy to pay attention to the instructions of the Buddhas, and it is not easy to make use of remote wilderness dwellings. In other words, he's saying that if it's hard for the monks to live in one place, in one particular area, then they'll tend to go to places where it's easier. And then those places will become crowded. So everyone hears that such and such a monastery is a great place, great food, lots of lay people supporting them. And so then all the monks want to go there. And then that leads to this unfortunate condition of it being, it goes from being a quiet, peaceful hermitage to being some crowdy, noisy place where the people are always sitting around chatting about silly things rather than studying the suttas and meditating. I have to say I haven't had this kind of direct experience because every monastery I've lived in had very tight controls over how many people could stay there at any given time. This just didn't come up. But apparently this does happen more often in some Asian countries where it is easier for people to just crowd together into a monastery. It tends to be more flexible and loose in allowing those sorts of things to happen. So that bit about living crowded together, well, actually that's something which we can see when you have a lot of housemates, for example. A lot of housemates who are maybe not so interested in Buddhist practice. They're more interested in playing loud music and watching silly shows and chatting about insipid things. It's not very good for your practice, is it? It's actually quite obstructive. It's a lot easier to practice well when you're either by yourself or optimally with other good spiritual practitioners, other people who are sincerely committed to Buddhist practice. So that's the third of the future dangers. Next one, he says, next, monks, a monk considers. Currently, people are harmonious, rejoicing together, not arguing, blending like milk and water, looking at each other with affectionate eyes. But there will be a time when there is danger and turmoil, and people get in vehicles and go in all directions. When there is danger, people gather where it is safe. There they live crowded together. When living crowded together, it is not easy to pay attention to the instructions of the Buddhas, and it is not easy to make use of remote wilderness dwellings. So this one, for this one, I think of the context of ancient India, where there were a lot of very small kingdoms composed of scattered towns and villages. And there was a major problem with bandits and brigands and groups of criminals who would even attack whole villages or attack whole towns. And that's not so common in a relatively peaceful, safe country like this one, like the United States. But it does still happen in some of the more chaotic places of the world these days. So when there's danger and turmoil, then the fabric of society starts to break down. People, it says here, people flee in all directions. But also people they sometimes forget about looking after the monks. It stops being their first priority. When someone's first priority is surviving, then taking care of the monastery is usually not at the top of the list. What comes to mind for me actually was during the height of the civil war in Sri Lanka about 20 years ago or so. A lot of the monasteries in the northern part of the country were abandoned. It was just too dangerous to live there. With all the violence that was happening, the monks just fled, and the lay people fled, and these monasteries were just left abandoned, or they were destroyed by mm, terrorists and other unpleasant incidents. So that's also not particularly good for practice. If you have to run away from your monastery and it gets burned down, that's really not particularly supportive conditions. So when you are living in a place where relatively safe, relatively peaceful, there's not a lot of violence, there's not a lot of hostility, well, then recognize that that's a really valuable set of conditions. And it's not a guarantee. It's not something which you can be certain will always be that way. You never know when a civil war is going to break out. So currently in Burma, there's once again problems with severe civil and political unrest. So that means it's really not the best place to be right now. It's not the best place to practice. So I know a couple of monastics who are currently in Burma, and it's actually quite disruptive to their practice to have these unpleasant things happening while they're there. So those of us who are living in more peaceful situations, more peaceful countries, we should recognize that this is a really precious thing. It's a really precious thing to not have to worry about people coming and burning down your temple. Or if they try, the police station's 2 minutes away. So, not too much to worry about. Then the fifth danger, he says, next amongst the monk considers. Currently, the Sangha. So Sangha here is used in its most common sense, which is that of the monastic community. So the community of ordained monastics. It says, currently the Sangha is harmonious, rejoicing together, not arguing, reciting together, that means reciting the Dhamma and the Vinaya together, living comfortably. But there will be a time when the Sangha becomes divided. When there is division in the Sangha, it is not easy to pay attention to the instructions of the Buddhas, and it is not easy to make use of remote wilderness dwellings. So this fifth case, it's pointing to when we're living as part of a monastic community and we're all getting along well together, which is the case at this monastery right now. We all get along pretty well. Rejoicing together, not arguing, reciting together, living comfortably. That's all pretty true. But there's no certainty it will always be that way. There's no certainty that we're always going to get along. And also monastic communities tend to be subject to change. The number of people who are present changes. Who's here? People come and go. It's all quite common. And also people change as time goes by. So even if currently the community is getting along well and everything's going smoothly, it may not always be that way. We're still unenlightened human beings, and from time to time, there might be some disagreements. There might be some disputes. And sometimes in monasteries, it actually gets quite unpleasant. There was the case in the time of the Buddha of Devadatta. So the monk who tried to split the Sangha, who tried to steal away the Buddha's disciples and start his own group, to start his own Sangha separate from the Buddha. So that's an extreme example of how what should be the ideal conditions. A group of monks living with the Buddha seems like perfect conditions, but it's not a guarantee. This not so wholesome monk named Devadatta came along and started stirring up trouble. It stirred up a lot of trouble. And when there's that kind of division and disharmony in the Sangha, then yeah, it's not easy to practice well. One is caught up in the arguments and the disputes and power struggles, and one loses sight of what's really important. So the cultivation of a wholesome mind, cultivation of generosity, morality, samadhi, and wisdom. So it's important to recognize if you do currently have a peaceful, harmonious Sangha to practice with, that's a really valuable thing. It's not always going to be that way. Sometimes it's going to be difficult to get along with each other. Or sometimes it's going to be difficult to find a harmonious Sangha to associate with. Sometimes it's difficult to find any Sangha to associate with. Fairly often we get messages from people living wherever they live and saying there's no Buddhist temples close by. There's no monasteries where they can go and see the monastic community, where they can go and practice the teachings of the Buddha. So if you do have a harmonious Sangha that you can associate with, recognize what an incredibly rare, valuable, and precious thing that is, and make the most of it. So these are the 5 dangers listed in the sutta. And the Buddha sums up by saying, monks, seeing these 5 future dangers, a monk has sufficient reason to vigilantly, diligently, and resolutely live for the sake of reaching the unreached, attaining the unattained, and realizing the unrealized. So that's it for this sutta. You can say 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And if you have any questions, I can take questions at this time.
Thank you, Bhante, for sharing that powerful sutta. And welcome to some new friends joining in. So Miguel from Chile, Chittapala as well, and Edward. Did I say Edward? I can't remember. My memory's going. So Yen says, speaking of ideal conditions, the pandemic has taught me and others the value of being able to go and visit local temples. Conditions can change so quickly.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And Michael says the passage on health and I suppose decrepitude is relevant. He says, I twisted my 76-year-old body a few days ago and pain dictates. I'm headed for, hip and knee replacement.
Ouch.
Hip and or knee replacement. Hopefully neither, but hopefully just one if one has to be done. Says, trust me, the Buddha knew of what he speaks. Happily, all is practiced, so I'm not giving up. We go through life practicing for our inevitable death, I've often thought.
Yeah.
And lots of thank yous from Gita.
Send him blessing this evening for puja.
Yeah, we'll do some blessing chants for you.
And Michael also says, I think for myself, this is a good reason to have, if possible, people of all ages in the Sangha. And that was actually the last question / comment so far. So if there's anything else, feel free to type it in. Otherwise, you can join us this evening at 7:30 p.m. Bhante Suddhaso will be back for some meditation and Dhamma talk, as well as Q&A. And then for the rest of the week, we'll have our usual live stream schedule as well.
Okay. So, maybe that's it for the morning.
Seems like it. So thanks everyone for joining. Have a wonderful day of practice, and hopefully we'll see you this evening. We can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
All right.